After that, I spent some time bouncing around, seeming like I was moving from place to place. I didn't really have memory of it at the time. I, in fact, didn't even remember the instance with Alexander Fleck. The only memories I had from that time were clicks and flashes, short frames of memory, all of being bound in cages, shuffled from place to place. By the time that I started forming solid memories that I could make heads or tails of, I was finally starting to recover from my injuries. I was, of course, in a cage. I was no longer in a suit. I had been changed into, well, what amounted to tattered rags. Haphazard clothing that was fairly disheveled, covered with rips and stains, dirt, and I found myself surrounded by basically the lowest sort of people. They were gang members of some sort. I don't really remember what gang they were a part of. There are so many pity-any gangs that pop up, and just as quickly as they show up, they disappear. Constant wars between gangs make regularity an almost unheard of occurrence. There are very few of these gangs that stand the test of time. Most get wiped out within a few years of getting started. The one that was holding me didn't stand the test of time. They eventually faded out. At that point, I had no memories of anything that had happened. My entire life washed away. My first memories were of the cage and the drunken reprobates surrounding me on a 24-hour basis, feeding me sparsely, having fun throwing things at me from outside of the cage, trying to order me around, which I didn't take too kindly to. When I refused to be a lackey, when I was disobedient, and seemed to refuse to fall in line with their orders, they found a new use for me. They began taking me to a place they called the arena. Basically, it was an old-world boxing ring that had been haphazardly refitted as, well, a place to hold death matches, where they would pit me against other captives. Gangs, people who had people being held prisoner that they didn't find valuable in any other capacity, would make bets and wagers, throwing their captives into the cage and forcing them to fight. Sometimes it was just to who won, who was the last person standing. And if they wanted to make some serious money, they could make a wager for a death match. So, they started fighting me like a dog, throw me in a cage with someone else, and no other choice but to fight. I very quickly had to learn to defend myself, and not only to defend myself, to fight back, to hold nothing back. I didn't really have any other option. The people that I was fighting, well, usually they didn't really have much self-governing will to speak of. They had been beaten down to the point where survival was all that mattered. So when they got thrown in the cage, they never thought twice about what to do next. They knew that what was expected of them was to beat me, either beat me senseless or kill me. And I took more than a few beatings before I realized that as long as I was alive, it was going to keep going. That it was either take the beating or dish one out yourself. But I never relinquished control. I might be their captive. I might have to deal with being thrown in a cage to fight. But I never gave in to just being theirs. I constantly looked for any way out, any opening, any gap. I eventually ended up getting traded for a large sum of money. On more than one occasion, actually. I started to become one of the favorites at the arena. The drunken morons that populated that place seemed to favor me. After about 8 straight wins, they started upping the ante and throwing me into more hazardous situations, adding weaponry, even pitting me against older opponents. The people that owned me, so to speak, were starting to get very ballsy, pressing their luck in hopes of greater and greater profits. I was running short on time. The limited amount of time that I did get to spend watching the activity around me, I noticed the patterns of behavior and the results from them. People who would make bets and start pressing their luck. Their fighter was good, so they'd start pitting them against harder challenges to try to make more money, usually pushing it so far that they eventually got their fighter killed. And, as unfortunate as it was, the people who currently held my chains were beginning to push that direction. It wouldn't be long before they threw me into something that I wasn't going to come out of. But I had very little option. I had gotten a plan together to get the hell out. The guy who held the keys for my cage would usually set them on the table somewhere nearby at night once they all decided to go to sleep. And I had managed to, collect some materials. Every time they started throwing me into the cage, my opponents were usually wearing something, some small amount of clothing, at very minimum. So, during the fights, I began tearing off small pieces, just a little bit here and there, whatever was inconspicuous, that I could make it seem like was just part of the fight. And I had also collected a piece of metal that I had managed to grind down during the night, turning it into sort of a hook. I had collected enough cloth and the hook that I was almost able to reach the keys. While everyone was sleeping, I would start tying these pieces of torn clothing off to each other, make a rope, and then attach the hook at the end of it and start throwing it, trying to snag the keys. I was almost there. A few more fights and I'd be able to reach it. I just had to get enough cloth before then, before they put me into a fight that I couldn't fight my way out of. A death match I had no chance of winning. Today was going to be my first match in a few weeks. I was finally starting to recover from the injuries from my last match. Hopefully, whoever I was fighting against would be wearing enough clothing that I could get the last of what I needed. As they wheeled my cage into the arena, there was a wide assortment of different individuals. As usual, a mixture, adults, kids. Some of them I'd seen before and others were new, as always. You could always tell the new fighters as they were, as frightened as newborn puppies, looking around in terror, wondering what was going on. I remember having that look on my own face. A few different fights went by, before eventually my own match came up. They wheeled the cage up to the ring. The ring itself had what you might call entry gates. There were 4 entry gates to the ring, so that they could release multiple captives into it simultaneously. If they were doing a fight with more than 2 individuals, this made it easy to do so without any attempts to escape. But as I saw other cages being rolled up to the ring, I was unfortunate It appeared that my luck had run out. The idiots who had ownership of me were getting way too risky. The individuals that they rolled up were all adults. 3 of them. Damn it. It's over. These idiots are going to get me killed, I thought to myself as I stared at them. It doesn't matter how much fabric they have on them. There's no way I'm making it out of this. The flag above the ring was black. Depending on the color of the flag, that's the type of match you're fighting. Blue flags are point matches. Each fighter is awarded a certain number of points depending on the amount of hits he's able to land on his opponent. After you land a subsequent amount of hits, the match ends. They separate you and tell you to go back to your cages. Red flags are knockout matches. These matches are more about the blood spray. They want to see someone go completely out. The first one unconscious is the loser. If you go down, the fight's over. It wasn't like a boxing match where there was a referee who would separate you if one of them went down and tell you to back off while the other person got a chance to stand back up. If you went down, you just became a punching bag for the other person. They'd only pull you apart once the other person completely stopped defending themselves. Sometimes they'd end up dying, but we had a black flag. That is a death match. It doesn't stop until only one person in the cage is alive. And with 3 adults in there with me, the chances that it would be me were slim, if not none at all.